Ever find yourself scrolling through, like, social media and you just shake your head at some of the stuff people believe?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, "It's 2024, how can anyone still think the Earth is flat?" Or that vaccines are some government conspiracy.
Right.
We often just write these people off as being irrational, but is there more to it than that?
Well, there might be.
Hmm.
It's a fascinating concept called rational irrationality, and it suggests that sometimes believing things that seem totally illogical can actually be a rational choice.
Okay, I gotta be honest, I'm already a little lost. How can being irrational ever be rational?
Well, think about it this way. People get satisfaction and happiness,
Hmm.
what economists call utility, not just from material stuff, but also from what they believe. Think about beliefs that make you feel comfortable or like you belong, or even just that you're right, there's a real psychological component there.
So you mean like those bliss beliefs, the ideas we cling to just because we want them to be true, even if there's not much evidence?
Exactly. And we see this all the time. We're diving into a paper by Bryan Caplan today, and he argues that we're constantly, maybe subconsciously, weighing the good feelings we get from our beliefs against the chance that those beliefs might be wrong. It's like a cost-benefit analysis, but for our minds.
So let me see if I've got this straight. You're saying that if believing something makes me feel good, if that good feeling is stronger than the potential cost of being wrong, then boom, that's rational irrationality.
Exactly. And sometimes the cost of being wrong isn't that obvious. Kaplan uses this example of someone who overestimates how well they can function after they've had a few drinks.
Oh, I know that guy.
Right. In the moment, you get that boost of confidence, maybe feel a little braver than usual, but what's the potential cost? Could be getting fired from messing up at work because your judgment's impaired.
Yeah, not worth it.
Right. Or think about someone who chooses prayer healing over conventional medicine because they have such strong faith. For them, that unwavering belief might feel way more important than the health risks, at least in their own minds.
It's kind of wild how our brains work that way, though, right? Like, are there certain areas where we see this rational irrationality pop up more often?
And that's one of the most interesting parts of Kaplan's argument. He says that politics and religion are like prime real estate for this kind of thinking.
Okay, yeah, I can kind of see that. Politics can feel like a circus sometimes, but how does this rational irrationality actually play out in those areas?
Well, think about it. When you really have a strong political belief, what are the chances that one person's belief is going to actually, have an impact? The odds of your single vote swinging an election are incredibly slim, right?
So true. I've definitely been guilty of getting all fired up about an election, even though realistically my one vote probably doesn't change a thing.
Of course. And that's exactly what Kaplan is getting at. He's saying that even if your vote leads to policies that aren't the best for everyone in the long run, for you personally, the cost of being wrong is pretty tiny.
Interesting. So we can all cling to our bliss beliefs about which economic policies are best or what the role of government should be, even if those beliefs aren't really backed up by the facts.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this, Kaplan talks about anti-foreign bias as a great example. He points to data that shows a pretty big chunk of Americans want to reduce immigration, even though when you look at the economic data, it actually suggests that immigration is beneficial overall.
It's funny you should say that because I remember reading that part of the paper, and it really struck me how often we see this like fear of the other popping up in politics. Even when it doesn't make sense, it's like those fears and anxieties are just easier to deal with if we can blame them on some outside group, right?
Exactly. And that's where those bliss beliefs come back into play. Finding a scapegoat for complicated problems can be emotionally satisfying, even reassuring, even if the scapegoat is based more on how we feel than on reality. And Kaplan argues that something similar happens with religious beliefs too. He points out how some people can be completely certain about their religious views, even when there isn't a ton of evidence to back them up.
He even brought up a pretty striking stat in the paper. A huge percentage of people believe that the Bible is literally true, even though modern science and historical analysis might make that a little tricky to reconcile.
Yeah, and this isn't about saying whether those beliefs are right or wrong. It's more about understanding how those beliefs persist.
Yeah.
From any one person's perspective, they've got it right, and everyone else with a different view, well, by their definition, can't all be right.
It's like they say, everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but not to their own facts.
Precisely. And this idea of rational irrationality helps us understand why these different viewpoints, even ones without a lot of hard evidence, can stick around so stubbornly. Because for a lot of people, being wrong in these areas doesn't really cost them that much on a personal level.
So is this like a thing we're just stuck with? If our brains are wired to be rationally irrational, especially when it comes to stuff like politics and religion, are we destined to just keep bumping into each other over our bliss beliefs?
Well, Kaplan actually dives into that question, and he makes this really important distinction between what he calls inefficient irrationality and efficient irrationality.
Okay, I think I'm picking up what you're putting down. Lay it on me. Inefficient versus efficient.
So think of inefficient irrationality, like when sticking to those inaccurate beliefs starts to have these negative ripple effects that impact other people too.
Gotcha.
And Kaplan uses a really powerful example for this one. He talks about voting for a policy because you believe something about economics that just isn't quite right.
Even if it makes me feel good.
Exactly. Because even if that belief brings you comfort, it could lead to some pretty negative outcomes for everybody, not just you.
So my messed up logic, even if it makes me feel better, could end up hurting a lot of people, not just me.
Exactly. Now, on the flip side,
Hmm.
efficient irrationality is when the potential downsides are mostly contained to the believer. So let's say you decide to go with alternative medicine. As long as you're not, like, protesting vaccines and putting others at risk, that choice, even if it isn't based on solid science, might not be such a big deal in the grand scheme of
Yeah.
things, right?
So it's like, as long as I'm not trying to force my maybe not so rational beliefs on other people or, actually causing harm, my little quirks are okay.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
What Kaplan's work really highlights is this need to be aware of those spillover effects, those times when our bliss beliefs, no matter how good they make us feel, might lead to choices that negatively impact the people around us.
This whole conversation has been a real eye-opener. Makes you think twice about all those things we believe, often without even realizing it, or those topics that we get kind of defensive about when someone questions us, right? Like, what if some of our most deeply held beliefs are really based more on that feeling of comfort than on actual facts?
It is something to consider, for sure. I think the big takeaway here is to be willing to examine our own biases,
Mm-hmm.
be open to hearing new information, even if, and maybe especially when it challenges our comfy beliefs.
Very wise words. Well, there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into the strange world of rational irrationality. If you found this as thought-provoking as I did and want to dig even deeper into Kaplan's ideas, be sure to check out the show notes. We'll have a link to the full paper there. And until next time, stay curious out there, and don't be afraid to question even those beliefs you hold most dear.